So, hi, welcome to my talk, Fun with Flags. Oh, sorry, this is the old slide. Welcome to my talk, Move Fast and Don't Break Things, or How to Leverage Feature Flags for Fun and Profit. A little bit about me before we start. I'm a senior UI engineer at CrowdStrike. I run ultramarathons sometimes. I climbed and I organize codebar, the London chapter. I run a newsletter about computer scientists that you may or may not know. So if you want to know more about it, sign up. And you can find me with that weird handle pretty much everywhere. We're hiring, by the way, at CrowdStrike. We have quite a big team here. If you want to know more about us, talk to us at the end. I wanted that reaction. I asked for feature flag ideas, anti-patterns and suggestions a few days ago on Twitter, and several people answered back. Thank you to everyone. But Tomek linked me to a blog post that he wrote that really crystallized some of the ideas that I had. So big thanks. Show of hands, how many people here use feature flags? How many people use feature flags with environments, multiple environments? Okay, it went out considerably. So this talk comes from 7 years or so of using feature flags in my previous company and my current company, or flippers, as we used to call them, because Rails, I prefer flippers. So you might hear me refer to them as flags, feature flags, and flippers. Oh, okay, all the edits are there. So this is what we're going to be talking about. So we are going to talk about what are feature flags for people that don't really know what they are. How will they look like, or how do they look like in Ember? Why you should use them, totally. But be aware of the trade-offs they bring. And then to wrap everything up together, the life cycle of a flag, where we're going to talk about 3 different stages and important things to have in mind when you use feature flags. What I won't be talking about, I won't be talking about Ember's own feature flags. This is totally different talk, but I do hope this talk is useful to them. And I won't be talking about like how exactly to set them up in your system, like what kind of backend, front end, what kind of backend you'll have to support turning them on, turning it off. It really depends, and I don't think there's an Ember official way to do this. So that's a whole different talk. But to give you an idea of that, as I was saying, when I used to work in Rails, there's this gem called Flipper that provides you with a backend where you can create, they call them features as well, and then you can turn them on, off. You can enable them by percentage of users. So all that kind of system is not important to this talk. We can talk about it later if you want to. So if you want to have a basic notion of what it could be in Ember, for example, imagine just a service. You have a simple service that is the feature flag service. And as the application starts, fetches a big JSON from whatever you hold your JSONs, where the key is the flag that you have active on your system, and the value is true or false that tells you if the feature flag is on or not. Simple as that. Let's keep that as an example. So how do they look like in Ember, or how can they look like? So at CrowdStrike, we have, for example, this helper that has feature flag. And as you can see, it's a very simple case for feature flags. If the feature flag is on, that button will show up. If it's off, it won't. A little bit more complex. Imagine that you have an old component and a new component, and you're going to change something. If the feature flag is on, you'll see the new one. If the feature flag is off, you see the old one. So far, so good. This is how it could look like in JavaScript if you're doing these checks in JavaScript land. You can have a decorator, which we have, has feature flag. That will be true or false according to the value, and you can use it there on that button function. Or you can have, as I said, a service that you can just ask, hey, is this feature flag is on or off? And you'll return accordingly. I'm going to talk a bit about this just because we're going to talk about it later on, but you can start seeing as feature flags accumulate, you can start having the old component and the new old component and the old new component and the new component. So we'll deal with this because we're trying to avoid this, because this, you go from 1 path to 2 paths to 4 paths to 8 paths, and then it's turtles all the way down or up because it's exponential. So why feature flags? We got to convince you first. The first advantage is easy to understand. Like, you keep new things hidden. You can work on new stuff without putting it out there. Doesn't need to be finished. You won't create potential bugs for the user. The user won't be able to click on that button that has no handle yet. So this is half of the drive for the talk title. Like, you don't break things. Let's start with the end. Don't break things. So you can test behind the scenes until you're happy with everything. When you're happy with everything, then you can release feature flag. You can release features with just the flip of a switch. You just turn it on, and everybody will have access to the features that you just built. If something goes wrong in the meantime, you can just turn it off and nobody will see anything anymore. It's pretty handy. No need to wait for development pipelines. As I said, you can work on, you can see work in progress code with production data. I don't know about you, but how many times have you been burned about, you tested your components with mock data and all is fine because mock data is perfect and it has great shape, but then you put that out there with real data that users inputted and everything goes, yeah. Don't underestimate how much real data can divert from mock data. So being able to put something out there, users won't see it, but you will see because you can just turn the feature flag on for yourself, and then you see the page break and you understand why. Oh, this date, I was expecting this date to be there. It's not there. Yeah, it's a very good advantage of feature flags. Swagger files can't give us all this complexity. The third advantage that you might realize later is that if things are hidden and they don't need to be complete, then you can work on smaller things, as small as you're comfortable with. Like, if shipping a button is your sweet spot, great. For me, it's more like 1-day tasks, things that I know that I can fit into a day. And it's not a day of testing. A day of coding is a day of coding, testing, pipeline, code reviews. Show of hands have you heard of elephant carpaccio? Elephant, like the animal, carpaccio, like cutting into the really tiny slice. Nobody. Oh, great. Oh, I feel special to introduce you to it. So this is a technique introduced in my previous company by Douglas Squirrel, where it's quite visual. I haven't found a vegan-friendly metaphor for this, but like, imagine an elephant in how to eat an elephant, like one slice at a time. But like, you need small slices that you can chew, that you can do it. So it's the same thing with, like, imagine that somebody comes to you with a big feature. Like, how can you envision doing all that and estimate and make sure they're in the right track? You slice them up in the smallest slices possible. So feature flags allow you to do this. You can have the tiniest Jira tasks all lined up, or in parallel if that works for you. But you can have them all line up, and all of them are behind 1 or 2 feature flags, ideally 1. And you can just do them bit by bit, and you will see every day changes on production. So this technique really changed how, together with feature flags, really changed how I think about splitting work. How do I think about shipping work, and how do I think about working in an agile environment? With smaller tasks, it's easier to understand if you're deviating from your expectations or not. Especially, that's why I like the 1-day tasks. If you do have stand up every day, if I've spent 2 stand-ups saying that I'm still working on the 1-day task, I need help. There's something here. Either we didn't size it properly, or it's too complex for me and I need other people. So find your cadence. Mine is daily, but find your cadence for these tasks, because with feature flags, you have much more visibility and you know if you're going off the rails or not. So the last reason I have to convince you for feature flags, it depends on a case-by-case scenario and how you release features. But going back to everything that I've said so far, if you keep things hidden with the right feature flag management tool, like the Flipper gem I mentioned, you can work on new stuff and just make it visible on certain conditions. And so that allows you to phase out the rollout of a certain feature. You can start with just the developers working on it. You can then extend it to QA engineers. Then you can extend it to sales so they get familiar with the thing they're about to sell. And then you can just release it to early adopters, the people that you work with that are really, really, really on your side, and they love to experiment the new stuff, the shiny thing that might not be very stable. Like, you should capitalize on these people. But a word of caution here, like, don't confuse feature flags with roles. So as soon as you start using feature flags to control the visibility of certain things to power users or a certain region of the globe, you're in a bad place. Like, if it's something that you don't intend to release to 100% of the people, feature flags is not the thing for you. Like, that feature flag will live forever, and you're going to have to support those two paths of code forever. So now that I hopefully convince you to look into feature flags, let me briefly talk about the reverse of the coin. So, like, what are the trade-offs? That nothing comes for free. So what do you have to pay? You have additional overhead. We'll see this better when we go through the life cycle of a feature flag. But this means that you have to write extra code. You have to think about two different designs. You have to think about two different texts, possibly. It brings additional overhead for the whole team. It increases the complexity, not just of your code, because you're going to have 2 paths, 4 paths, and so on. Depends on how many splits you want to do. But imagine these conditionals, as you've seen. These feature flags are mostly conditionals. Imagine having them spread across your application. Designers need to be aware of all that, of all the things. Product owners need to be aware of that. It increases the complexity of the testing, because now you test all those paths, and you'll forget paths. Basically, that's the problem. The other trade-off, and that's why I asked about multi-environments. If you have multiple environments, now you have multiple problems, because imagine if these things were a table, and now you have multiple environments. It's like a 3D matrix of things that can go wrong and out of sync, and things that you have to think of. I don't have a silver bullet for it, but and I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that it brings additional considerations when you're going to include feature flags on your application. So now that I've convinced you that feature flags is a great idea, how can we get there? How can we actually develop quicker and in a safer way? How can we make this happen? So let's talk about the life cycle of a feature flag. We'll start at ideation. We have an idea for a feature. Feature probably implies a feature flag. Where do we start? Good naming, the hardest of the problems. Don't use cryptic things. It should be something that as soon as you see it on the code, you understand what is the feature or what is the part of the feature. Depends on how much you want to cut it. But good naming goes only a certain so far, and after that, you do need documentation. You need a lot of documentation. And in that case, use the tools that you have. If it's a wiki, great, but keep that documentation alive. What features do we have on production and other environments? What it does? Is it active or not? Has it been deprecated? Is there a date to deprecate it or to remove it? And remember that features are not just your responsibility. Like, you are the person that put the code there, that checks it, but a product manager is the person that oversees these things. They should tell you when to release these things. When do we expect to release them? Technical writers need to be aware of the feature flags, so they write this support text that will come to the new feature or the new component. It's a whole team effort. This is probably when you want to set a date for an expectation, when to remove this. As I said, feature flags are not supposed to stay here forever. You're supposed to have an idea, when are we going to remove this? You could, depends on how you work, but you could/should separate front-end flags from back-end flags, if the back-end is changing as well. This gives you an extra opportunity to phase in more of what I was saying, phasing in new changes. But again, this brings extra complexity, so use it at your own risk. If there's a very important idea on the ideation part, is this: like, keep a record of the imminent flag removal. I've already touched about the documentation, but open a Jira ticket, open a Trello ticket, open a pull request, removing the ticket, removing the feature flag if you can, as soon as you can. Like, create something that will remind you that this needs to be cleaned up. In our case, we try to open a Jira ticket as soon as we start splitting tickets for all the tasks that we need to build for a certain initiative. There will be a ticket that says remove that thing, and that implies removing the code and removing the feature flag from the actual backend system that we have where we turn them on and off. Otherwise, I'll guarantee you those flags will stay forever until somebody gets shot in the foot because they forgot about a feature flag. They go mad, they remove that thing, and then somebody is happy that the feature is gone, but that person was not happy. And if this happens a few more times, that person will quit. So now that we move to a different stage, we're going to delivery phase. We're going to start writing some code. What do we need to be aware of here? So introducing feature flags also should change how you write code. You should write, the code that you write should be optimized for removal. So this is a very simple example. But do you see how the display logic or the business logic is mixed up with the feature flag logic there? And here it's totally different. Think about this whenever you open a pull request that has a feature flag. In this case, that line will be highlighted, and it's the only line that deals with feature flags. Well, that one is that whole line, but there's more there. So small things like this, overall, throughout a project, they make a big impact on how to understand what's being added, so the feature flag, and then when you're going to remove them, they're going to be a reverse diff of what you added. So if both of these diffs can focus the reviewers on feature flag, much better. I've actually, a few weeks ago, I had to kind of fix a bug that was introduced because a feature flag was removed. And when it was introduced, it was kind of following the first style and not the second one. So the person that was removing the feature flag was like, oh, this is not important anymore. So they totally missed that bit of logic, and that created a bug. So this is small, but makes a big difference. Something that might work for you depends on how your development process works. But most of the time, you used to work in my previous company, is if you're going to open a new pull request, just write the new feature. Just write normally. Don't think about feature flags. And then your last commit is the commit where you put that if else, for example. If you're lucky, nobody touched that code in the meantime, and you can just revert that commit to remove the feature flag. When it works, like 60% of the times it worked every time. And when it works, you're like, oh, this was really clean. So related to that thing, this is a very simple way to think about when you're writing this code to make it easy to remove. If you think about introducing a feature flag as like those, I don't know the English name, but when you're in a railway and there's the kind of needle thing that shifts you, like think of these splits of that. Try to make them as simple as possible. Don't spread them everywhere. Like sometimes imagine that the feature that you're working on implies changing a component, but it's not just changing a button. It's changing a button here and the position thing and the color here. It's better to just create a new component. Here is a situation where duplication is pretty good. Duplicate that component, change that component, and where that component gets rendered, that's where you put your split. And then when you're going to remove the feature flag, remove the old component, rename the new component if you need it, and now we just have one component. So this one, I was talking with Conto about this because I wanted to know if they do this. Because I think my friend Sam Jewell introduced me to this idea. He kind of had this brilliant idea. It was like, what if we introduce feature flags on by default on tests? And everyone's like, no, that's a terrible idea. But then you try it, And the workflow is more or less like this. You go to your test setup. In Rails is really, really easy. There's a place for it, and you just say this feature flag true. And you develop your feature, and then you just let test run. Things will break. That's great. That's going to tell you which tests will need to change in the pull request where you're introducing the feature flag. It will tell you which tests need to be duplicated. This one is off. This one's on. So then when somebody, probably not you, somebody else, you might not even be in the company anymore, somebody comes in and has to remove the feature flag, they just need to remove code. The tests are there. They need to delete old tests, old code, and yeah, like this person will be like, whoever came in and introduced this feature, thank God. So it's a radical idea, but try it. It really makes a big difference. And this is where the elephant carpaccio will come in handy. Like ship with that. It's a funny name, isn't it? It's just very visual. So yeah. So now that you have features on your side, think about this. Have a button ready, ship it. It doesn't do anything when I click it. That's okay. It only shows an alert. That's okay. You can really, really ship things incrementally. Like you could write a small test that the button gets clicked and an alert shows up. It's great. And then the next ticket, you add the behavior, you change the test. It really allows you to write small tickets and just see progress every day and know where you're going. With small tickets, you make solid progress, and it's progress that you can evaluate well and know if you're in the target or not. Great. So we idealize a feature, we build a feature, we release the feature, everyone has the feature, turn 100% on. Now it's time to delete it. Hopefully this is the easy part. Remember when we decided when to remove the feature flag? Like somebody has to be vigilant for this date or this quarter or whatever criteria you set. So make sure that happens. Remember the Jira ticket or the pull or merge request we opened before? Probably needs a rebase or something, but somebody can take care of it, remove the feature, remove the code, remove the tests, and hopefully if you turn the feature flag on by default, it's just removing code. You don't need to adapt anything else. It's very frustrating when you're going to, remove the feature flag. That's really simple. And you're going to remove the feature flag and the tests that you did not adapt start breaking. And you're like, I didn't even work on this feature. Yeah, it's very annoying when that happens. You remember that it's like that joke of write code as if the next person that comes to maintain your code has your address and is a psychopath. It's kind of like the same thing. Like somebody else is going to remove that. It might be you. It might be somewhere else. Just be kind to them and just, adapt the tests. Remember, that's what I was talking about. Remember, exactly. And that's it. Now you just need to update any documentation that you have saying that the feature flag was removed on this date. Go to your backend and say, remove the feature flag from the place where you can turn it on and off because you don't need it anymore. And that's it. You're done. We've introduced and removed the feature flag. So as we get to the end of the talk, I want to highlight that I kind of focused more on the practical challenges of flags. I believe that the advantages are pretty self-explanatory. I think they're easy to understand, but I also wanted to make this talk focusing on the details and some practical knowledge that you accumulate as you work with them, because I think it's hard to put in concrete terms. Oh, feature flags, yeah, the idea is great, but how do you actually put it into, and what kind of mistakes can you avoid? So I feel like I give you a lot of pointers, but I don't expect you to remember everything. That's why these talks are recorded, right? So until you can rewatch this video and when it gets released, this is what I want you to take home. How do we achieve what the title of the talk promises? How do we move fast without breaking things? So feature flags are awesome. They allow you to deploy work in progress without affecting users. You can test behind the scenes. You can show new features only when you want, when they're ready. You can work faster, ship faster by finishing smaller tasks. You get that dopamine brain. It's like button is done, behavior is done, modal is done. Yeah. And finally, this is all great, but there are some trade-offs. So remember that and write down a team plan of how you want to deal with them. So talk with your team, because again, this is not just the developer's side. This affects the whole product. And write down how are you going to do this, because not everything needs a feature flag. If you're going to change how a certain phrase is structured, you might not need a feature flag for that. So think about the overhead that it brings. Okay. Thank you for this. Come talk to me about feature flags. Tell me what I missed, what I said wrong. Yeah, I'd love to talk about it. Thank you.